You will not believe how quietly the Wild West went to sleep. After all the gunfights, gold rushes, and stampedes, you might imagine it ended with fireworks and thunder. But in truth, the Wild West faded the way campfire smoke drifts into dawn, slow, sighing, and full of ghosts. You will wander tonight through the quiet after the chaos, through dusty streets where boots once thundered and saloons once sang. You will hear the wind brushing across forgotten fences, smell the faint sweetness of sage, and feel the moment when even the toughest outlaws finally lay down their heads. And somewhere in that hush between legend and history, you will discover that the West did not really die. It simply went to bed. You probably will not survive this. Not from danger, but from drowsiness. But before we begin tonight's story, if you really enjoy these calm history stories, please like the video and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your comments mean a lot to us. They help us to keep the work on. Now, dim the lights and let's go back in time together. You stand in the last light of the 19th century on a trail that once echoed with hoofbeats and hollers. The sky stretches wide and gold above you, and for a brief moment, the wind feels tired, like even it has ridden too many miles. You pass through a town that once swarmed with prospectors, gamblers, and desperados. Now, the saloon doors creak without purpose. The dust swirls lazily across the main street, as if sweeping up the leftover drama of a century gone restless. A wooden sign swings overhead. "Welcome to Tombstone," it says, though few now arrive. The gunfight at the OK Corral is long over. Its echo lingers only in storybooks and whiskey talk. You can almost see Wyatt Earp stepping out of shadow, his mustache catching the lamplight, before fading back into myth. Historians remain divided here. Was the Wild West ever truly wild? Or did newspapers exaggerate it for sales and fame? Some say the real chaos was limited to a few boomtowns. Others argue the anarchy was everywhere, unwritten, unpredictable, and ungoverned. Either way, the men and women who lived it felt the sharp edge of freedom and fear in every breath. You walk past a blacksmith shop, cold now, silent. Iron tools rest on their hooks like soldiers at ease. In the distance, a horse nickers, and the sound carries far, a reminder of a time when sound was life, when silence could mean danger. There is a curious fact about this slow dusk of the West. By the late 1880s, more Americans lived in cities than on frontiers. The census of 1890 declared the frontier closed. Imagine that. A government officially announcing that wilderness had run out. Paperwork had ended an era. You almost laugh softly. How does one file the sunset? Still, for a while, a few stubborn souls stayed behind. Old prospectors who kept digging holes they could barely climb out of. Wandering cowboys who could not imagine sleeping under a roof. Women who ran post offices, schools, and saloons because no one else bothered. The West was never only about gunmen. It was also about caretakers of empty places. The air cools now. A night bird calls across the sagebrush, and the horizon blushes violet. You feel the first calmness in generations settle across this land. It is as if the desert itself sighs in relief. There is a certain peace that comes after exhaustion. You sense it in the wind, in the cracked boards, in your own slowing heartbeat. The West is not dead. It is just very, very sleepy. You find a weathered bench outside the sheriff's office. Someone carved initials into it long ago, JT plus EL. Perhaps lovers, perhaps rivals. Either way, their story is part of the timber now. A tumbleweed drifts across your boots, bumping lazily against your leg like a tired cat. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote begins to sing, not fiercely but mournfully, as though saying good night to a friend. In the dim light, the last hints of gold shimmer on the rooftops. You realize that every story that ever began with a pistol will one day end in silence. And that silence, in its own strange way, feels like forgiveness. Tomorrow, trains will bring newspapers and machines. Soon, the cowboys will trade their horses for telegraphs and telephones. But tonight, just for this night, you can sit with the Wild West as it finally drifts towards sleep. The dust settles. The crickets start their whisper. The frontier exhales. And somewhere deep in your chest, you do too. The road stretches into twilight, and you follow the faint smell of smoke. Someone, somewhere, still keeps a small fire burning. Its light flickers across a ring of tired faces, each one carved by time, laughter, and dust. You step closer, and the men nod without surprise. They have been expecting company all their lives. The fire cracks softly, sending sparks toward the stars that already crowd the indigo sky. You hear the low murmur of stories, a prospector's voice dry as old whiskey, telling of a vein of gold that turned to fool's dust. A former outlaw swearing he once met Billy the Kid and lived to tell it, though his tale changes every time he speaks. You sit among them, feeling the gentle heat on your face. The campfire feels like the heart of the fading West, small, glowing, but still alive. Someone passes you a tin cup of coffee, bitter and black. It tastes like smoke and stubbornness. They talk about the good old days, though their smiles twist with the truth. Those days were hard, cold, and lonely. There were no heroes, really, only survivors. You sense that what they miss is not the danger, but the freedom that came with it. The feeling of being no one and everyone all at once. A curious side note, historians now believe that most cowboys were not white Americans, but Mexican vaqueros, freedmen and native horsemen. The West was a tapestry of tongues and skin tones, bound not by law, but by landscape. It is strange, you think, how the movies later painted it all in one color. Sepia. One of the men begins to hum, a slow, aching tune carried down from the trail days. It is not a song of triumph, but of endurance. The melody weaves through the night like wind over grass. You close your eyes and listen. For a moment, the world feels still enough to forget that it once roared. You notice a shape beyond the circle, a young boy tending the horses. He cannot be more than 12. He looks at the men with a kind of awe that only youth still knows. In his eyes, every one of them is a legend, though they can barely lift their saddles anymore. That perhaps is how myths are born, around the fire, through tired smiles. The night air smells of pine and ash. Somewhere beyond the ridge, an owl hoots, soft, solitary, timeless. The sound makes one of the older men chuckle. Even the owls are outlaws here, he mutters. Everyone laughs, gently. Then, for a while, no one speaks. Only the crackle of the fire fills the silence, a metronome marking the end of an era. The flames bend lower, licking the air in slow motion. You realize that when the last ember dies, so too will this kind of night. A historian once wrote that the West did not vanish. It simply changed shifts. The cowhands became railroad men, shopkeepers, fathers, and dreamers. The gun belts were traded for suspenders. The freedom they once rode for became nostalgia they would tell to their children. But there remains a debate. Did they lose something sacred when they gained peace? Or did peace simply let them breathe again? You pull your coat tighter as the desert breeze grows cooler. Someone stirs the ashes one last time. The fire sighs as though grateful for the rest. They will sleep under the stars tonight, each man wrapped in a blanket that smells of sweat and horse. Above them, the Milky Way stretches like a silver river, its reflection glimmering faintly in the pupils of those half-closed eyes. As you lie back, the ground feels both hard and honest. The earth has carried every step of this nation's restless feet. It deserves its own sleep too. Tomorrow, some of these men will head east to work in towns where the stars are hidden by gaslight. Some will stay, hoping the gold rush returns. Most will simply fade into history, their stories polished smoother with each retelling. The fire's last ember blinks like a tired eye. You feel your thoughts begin to wander, past gunfights, past glory, into that soft fog where memory becomes dream. The wind moves through the camp, carrying the faint scent of cedar and coffee. You think to yourself that maybe the Wild West never truly ended. Maybe it only dimmed the glow of a dying fire, small, stubborn, and still warm enough to remember. The flames sigh once more. You breathe in, and for a moment, the stars above seem close enough to touch. Sleep begins to settle around the camp like an old friend. And as the night deepens, you realize the West is not fading. It is simply resting. Dawn rises softly, as if careful not to wake the sleepers too soon. You watch the first light stretch over the empty prairie, gilding each blade of grass like a secret kept too long. The camp is quiet now. Only the faint hiss of cooling embers remains. You rise, dust off your coat, and start walking toward town. The dirt road winds through the hush of early morning. In the distance, a bell tolls once, then again. The sound of order echoing where chaos once ruled. This is a new West, one that wakes not to the clang of gunfire, but to the creak of a store sign and the bark of a shopkeeper's dog. You pass the sheriff's office, its door freshly painted. A badge gleams on the desk inside, but it gathers no dust, only reflection. The sheriff himself leans in the doorway, coffee in hand, his face lined but calm. He nods at you as though greeting not a stranger, but peace itself. It is curious how peace can feel heavier than war. These men who once drew guns in a heartbeat now wrestle with silence. The calm is too complete. It echoes. Some of them, you can tell, miss the danger, not the violence, but the purpose that came with it. Historians remain divided here. Was the taming of the West a triumph of civilization or the slow suffocation of spirit? One school claims it was the birth of progress. Another calls it the death of freedom. Perhaps you think both are right. A shopkeeper sweeps the porch of his general store. He smiles when you pass, the broom whispering rhythmically across the planks. Once, this same man might have sold ammunition. Now he sells coffee beans and bolts of cloth. He hums an old trail song, though his voice softens it into something almost like a lullaby. You stop at the livery stable, where a horse snorts at your approach. Its coat gleams bronze in the morning light. A stable boy, no older than 16, tips his hat to you. He tells you the sheriff made a new rule: no guns in town, not even unloaded ones. His eyes widen as he says it, as though such a rule were almost magical. By 1881, many western towns had indeed outlawed firearms within city limits. Dodge City, Deadwood, and Tombstone all demanded visitors check their guns at the edge of town. Imagine that. The wild towns of the West were some of the earliest advocates of gun control. You cannot help but smile at the irony. The most notorious gunfighters lived under laws stricter than most modern cities. The boy laughs when his mule brays at nothing. He says the animal hates quiet. It gets nervous when there are no gunshots or shouting. You chuckle. The West itself seems to share that discomfort, as though unsure what to do with serenity. The morning breeze carries the scent of baking bread. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rings, followed by the laughter of children chasing a stray chicken. This, you realize, is the real revolution. Not the one won by bullets, but the one built on ordinary mornings. Peace, it seems, is less dramatic, but far more enduring. It does not shout, it hums. It lives in the spaces between chores, in the kindness of shared coffee, in the long, quiet afternoons that no longer end in fear. You sit outside the general store and watch a telegraph operator set up wires. The lines hum faintly, stretching eastward toward Chicago, westward toward dreams. The frontier is no longer a boundary. It is a bridge. The telegraph's soft clicking feels like a heartbeat, the rhythm of connection replacing the thunder of hooves. Yet still, a few old men grumble on the porch of the saloon, saying the world is moving too fast. They miss the uncertainty, the rawness, the wild edge of yesterday. They say, peace makes men soft. But another man answers, no, it makes them sleep well. The group falls silent. The truth, like the morning, is gentle but undeniable. A curious side note, the phrase Wild West did not truly gain popularity until after it was gone. Buffalo Bill's traveling show, The Wild West, turned nostalgia into theater. By 1893, the frontier had become a performance. You wonder if the old gunslingers sitting here ever realized they were already being turned into bedtime stories. The sun climbs higher now. Shadows shorten, and the street glows with a warmth that feels almost domestic. You take a deep breath and taste dust, coffee, and something sweeter, stability. And as the breeze brushes through your hair, you realize something tender. The Wild West did not end in defeat. It ended in exhale, peace was not its opposite. Peace was its dream all along. Soon, you will see that even the rowdiest saloons learn to rest. Even laughter must one day sleep. But before we continue tonight's story, if you really enjoy these calm history stories, please like the video and subscribe. Evening drapes itself across the town again, that slow kind of twilight that makes every window glow like an ember. You wander toward the saloon, drawn by the faint echo of piano keys. The tune wobbles, as if unsure whether to be joyful or mournful. Inside, the air smells of pine soap and yesterday's whiskey. You push open the doors, and the familiar creak greets you, softer now, like an old friend whispering goodnight. Where once stood shouting gamblers and sharp-eyed dancers, now there are only a few locals nursing mild drinks and softer dreams. The barkeep polishes the counter with deliberate care, as though he is erasing the noise that used to live here. Not much excitement left, he says, half smiling. His voice is calm, like the last note of a song. He tells you that the piano player is new, used to play in the church down the road. The old player moved east, said the silence out here was too loud. You find a seat near the corner and watch the light sway over dusty bottles. The mirror behind the counter reflects more memory than motion. You see in it the faint ghost of a gunfight that happened years ago. The bartender ducks, a glass shatters, someone laughs, someone falls. But now, the room just breathes. Historians remain divided here. Was the decline of the saloon a moral victory or a cultural loss? When Prohibition began its slow march westward, some saw it as redemption. Others called it the death of community, for the saloon was more than a bar. It was the heartbeat of every dusty town. Politics, gossip, business, heartbreak, all lived beneath its swinging lamps. The barkeep pours you a cup of sarsaparilla, saying whiskey is too much trouble these days. You sip it and realize he is right. It tastes like a new beginning. He laughs when you ask if he misses the wild nights. Sometimes, he says, but peace tips better. The way he says it makes you think he has found the quiet humor in survival. Outside, a breeze rolls through the street, carrying the faint jingle of a piano chord through the shutters. A woman's laugh drifts up from the porch. She used to dance here when the place was packed every night. Now she teaches waltzes to children in the schoolhouse. Time has its own choreography, you think. It spins even the rowdiest souls into gentler shapes. There is a curious side note from historians about this calm transformation. In many Western towns, women's temperance leagues pushed for closing saloons, not just for virtue, but to reclaim the streets from violence. As women gained social power, the nights grew quieter. Some say it was the dawn of modern domestic life. Others argue it was simply bedtime for chaos. The piano slows into something tender now, a lullaby of the frontier. The player hums softly, and you find yourself swaying in rhythm. The bar's lamplight flickers, casting lazy shadows across the walls. Each flicker feels like a page turning in a storybook that is almost done. Outside, a wagon rolls by, wheels murmuring against the dirt road. You watch the driver tip his hat, then disappear into the soft blue dark. Crickets begin their nightly chorus, And somewhere a coyote howls at a moon too round for trouble. For a moment, you close your eyes. The saloon's air feels warm and slow. You can almost hear the past settling into the corners, curling up like a cat near the fire. Funny thing, says the barkeep, interrupting your thought. When the nights got quiet, people finally started talking again. Real talk. Not shouting, not arguing, just stories. Turns out, we always liked stories more than gunfights. He grins. You smile back. That feels like the West's truest truth. The lamp above you burns lower, and the last few patrons stretch, yawn, and drift homeward. The piano's final chord lingers in the air, trembling like a breath about to rest. You stand, thank the barkeep, and step outside. The street is silver in the moonlight. The air hums faintly with the smell of sage and cooling dust. You walk past the old hitching posts, the dry trough, the silent store signs. Everything feels bathed in forgiveness. And as you pause at the corner of the street, you realize even legends need lullabies. The Wild West is not gone. It is only asleep behind half-closed shutters, humming softly to itself. Tomorrow, you will hear the whistle of a train, an iron lullaby for a land learning to rest. But for now, let the night breathe. Let the crickets sing. Let the West dream. You hear it before you see it. A low, distant hum, like thunder that forgot how to roar. Then the rhythm builds, slow and steady, metal wheels finding their pulse along the rails. A train is coming. You step to the edge of the platform as the whistle cuts through the night. A long, mournful sound that could almost be mistaken for a sigh. Steam curls upward in white ribbons, glowing silver beneath the moonlight. It is not the cry of adventure anymore. It is the whisper of arrival. The iron horse that once symbolized conquest has become the lullaby of a continent. Each click of the rail sounds like a heartbeat, rocking the land to sleep. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the vibration hum beneath your boots. A reminder that even progress can have rhythm. Even technology can dream. The conductor leans from the window, his cap tilted, his lantern swinging like a pendulum of time. He nods when he sees you watching, and you wonder how many nights he has crossed this endless stretch of nothing, carrying letters, lumber, and weary travelers from one chapter of history to the next. Historians remain divided here. Some argue the railroad was the end of the Wild West, the final nail sealing the coffin of untamed land. Others say it was the start of something gentler, a world where distance no longer meant loneliness. Perhaps, as always, it was both. A curious side note. When the first transcontinental railroad was completed in 1869, the final spike was not gold, but brass. The golden one used for the ceremony was immediately removed, too valuable to leave in the earth. The symbolic heart of progress, you realize, was never meant to stay buried. The train screeches to a stop, and the hiss of escaping steam sounds like an old sigh of relief. Passengers step down, not gunslingers or gamblers this time, but families, merchants, and mail clerks. One woman cradles a baby wrapped in a quilt stitched with desert colors. A man carries a phonograph, careful as though holding the future itself. They are the new settlers, you think, not of land, but of comfort. They bring lullabies instead of pistols. They come seeking stillness rather than gold. You find a seat on a wooden bench by the platform and watch as the workers load crates marked Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco. The names blur together like dream destinations in a sleepy traveler's mind. The world has become connected now, a thread of steel weaving the once wild frontier into a single breathing body. The night grows quieter once the train leaves again, the distant clatter fading into the hum of insects. But the rails remain, stretching endlessly across the plains, glinting like two silver rivers under the moon. They look almost alive, a map that glows softly in the dark. You walk along the tracks, the gravel crunching beneath your boots. The smell of smoke still lingers, mingling with the sweet dryness of sage. A small owl watches from a telegraph pole, its feathers pale in the moonlight. It blinks once, as if acknowledging that the era of horses has given way to the age of steam. There is a kind of poetry in it, how the same wind that once carried dust now carries cinders, how the same stars that once guided wagon trains now shine above engines and iron. The frontier has not vanished. It has simply changed its music. You reach the end of the platform where a young telegraph operator sits in his booth, his fingers tapping messages down the wire. He glances up and smiles sleepily. The gentle tapping continues, like raindrops on a rooftop. He says he has been sending weather reports all night, but secretly, he likes to think he is sending lullabies. You laugh softly, because in this still moment, you almost believe him. The stars hang lower now. The moon slides westward, bathing the tracks in faint silver. You sit for a while, listening to the sound of your own breath sinking with the hum of distant rails. The train may have brought the end of the frontier, but it also taught the West to rest, to move without fighting, to drift without fear. The iron horse sighs somewhere over the horizon, and you feel its rhythm fade into the heartbeat of the land itself. The Wild West is still moving, just slower now, softer now, through the moonlight. The train's echo fades behind you, and the night opens again, wide, silver, and still. You follow the faint sound of lowing cattle, drawn toward the gentle rhythm of ranch life that never truly sleeps. In the distance, lanterns swing like fireflies across the open fields, marking the path to a lonely homestead under the endless sky. You cross a wooden gate, and the scent of hay and leather greets you. The barn door creaks, and there stands the rancher, broad-shouldered, quiet-eyed, moving slowly among his herd. He tips his hat when he sees you, then returns to his work with the patience of someone who has learned that the land moves at its own pace. He milks the last cow, the tin pail filling with soft rhythm. Each metallic drip sounds like the tick of a sleepy clock. You realize that out here, time is measured not by minutes, but by chores. The rancher hums something low, a tune older than he is. It blends with the night air until you cannot tell where his voice ends and the wind begins. A curious side note. while Hollywood painted cowboys as drifters chasing danger, most were closer to farmers than fighters. They fixed fences, mended boots, and read the weather like scripture. Their battles were against frost and drought, not outlaws. Their victories were counted in quiet mornings when every calf had made it through the night. He hands you a mug of warm milk, fresh, sweet, and oddly soothing. The warmth seeps into your hands as you sit on a hay bale, listening to the soft shuffle of hooves. Outside, the prairie stretches forever, painted in moonlight so pale it almost glows. You can hear a stream nearby, whispering over stones, the sound blending with the occasional snort of a horse half dreaming in its stall. The rancher leans against the doorframe, looking out. "You know," he says, "folks used to think life out here was all shootouts and poker. But truth is, the loudest thing you'll hear most nights is a hungry calf." He grins. It is the kind of grin that holds equal parts humor and exhaustion. Historians remain divided here. Some argue that ranching life marked the domestication of the Wild West, a symbol that the frontier spirit had been tamed. Others believe it was simply evolution, the West learning how to breathe steadily after too many years of running wild. Perhaps, as with all things, the truth lies somewhere in the dust between. You help him close the barn doors, and together you walk toward the house. The wooden boards creak underfoot, their rhythms syncing with the chirp of crickets. Inside, his wife tends the stove, her hair tied back, her movements slow and certain. A single oil lamp lights the room, its flames swaying softly, painting the walls in amber. She offers you bread still warm from the oven. The crust cracks gently between your fingers, releasing steam that smells like wheat and home. You take a bite, and the taste is simple, perfect. Out here, simplicity is not lack, it is luxury. The rancher points to a cradle by the window. Their baby sleeps soundly, cheeks rosy from the gentle heat. Outside, coyotes sing in the distance, but even their cries sound peaceful tonight. It feels as if the whole prairie has agreed to whisper. A curious moment from history. By the early 1900s, windmills began to dot the plains, spinning quietly above homes like these. They drew water from deep wells, allowing ranchers to survive droughts that would have destroyed earlier generations. Progress, you realize, does not always roar. It sometimes hums in circles above the grass. You step out again after supper, the air cool and still. The stars blaze with careless brilliance, thousands of tiny suns keeping watch. The rancher stands beside you, chewing on a piece of straw. He says, "The world keeps changing, but the land just waits. Always has you nod. There is something eternal about this silence, this small human rhythm beating softly against the enormity of nature." The West no longer shouts for attention. It hums. It breathes. It rests. The lanterns flicker in the distance, marking other homes scattered across the horizon. Each light a promise, each family a new verse in the same old song. The prairie wind moves through the tall grass, making it ripple like water. It sounds almost like applause, gentle, endless applause for survival itself. You turn back toward the barn one last time. A horse stamps its hoof. A rooster stirs in its sleep, mistaking the moon for dawn. And above it all, the windmill spins, steady and faithful. You exhale, feeling the calm of the land seep into your bones. The Wild West, you realize, has not died. It has settled down. And tonight, beneath this wide and silent sky, it sleeps soundly in its own bed of stars. The prairie quiet holds you still for a long while. When you finally move again, it's along a dusty road that winds toward a small town half forgotten by maps. You can tell, even before you reach it, that this is where the legends came to rest. The saloon doors no longer swing to the sound of piano or pistol. They creak now, only for the breeze. The old sign above them reads Silver Star, the paint faded to ghosts of color. Inside, a few lanterns flicker over empty tables, and one man sits alone, bent-backed, gray-haired, wearing a gun belt that hasn't seen bullets in decades. You recognize him by the stories. He was once called the fastest draw west of the Rio Grande. Children in mining towns used to whisper his name like a spell. Now his hands tremble as he lifts a cup of coffee, and the only thing quick about him is how softly he smiles. He gestures for you to sit. You came looking for the West, he says, his voice low as gravel. Well, you found what's left of it. He chuckles, quietly, like a secret only he finds funny. On the wall behind him hang photographs. Young men in wide hats, rifles balanced on their knees, eyes full of restless pride. The sepia has eaten most of their faces, but you can still sense the fire in them. He looks at them a long while. Most of us thought we'd go out in a blaze, he says. Turns out we just aged. The piano in the corner is missing half its keys. He drags his fingers across what remains, letting the broken notes drift into the air like sighs. Then, with the softest grin, he hums along. It's a tune from the cattle trails, the kind meant to soothe animals through long, endless nights. You realize it's a lullaby, not for cows this time, but for an era. A curious side note. Historians found that many of the West's most feared outlaws lived long enough to become sheriffs, deputies, even store owners. They traded their revolvers for ledgers, their reputations for quiet respectability. Violence, it seems, burned out faster than those who wielded it. And the men who once lived by the gun discovered something even harder than fighting, growing old in peace. He tells you stories not of shootouts, but of silence, of long winters in cabins, of tending to horses gone lame, of walking to town only to find it smaller every year. Used to be, he says, the whole world felt like a frontier. Now the frontier's in the rear view. He pulls out a deck of cards, bent, yellowed, still smelling faintly of whiskey. Care for a game? You nod, and together you play by lamplight. He wins a few hands, loses others, but never counts his points. He just watches the cards fall, one by one, with the same soft rhythm as dust settling on an empty street. Between plays, he leans back and stares out the window. The moonlight spills across the desert beyond, turning the scrub and rock into silver ghosts. Funny thing, he murmurs. When I was young, I thought being remembered meant living forever. Now I reckon it just means someone might whisper your name before falling asleep. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the faint creak of a sign from the old blacksmith shop. You follow it out, leaving him to his memories. The street is empty, save for one tumbleweed that rolls past as if late for something. You can smell rain in the distance, a rarity in these parts, but welcome. The sky flickers with lightning far off toward the mountains, and you remember another legend. Buffalo Bill Cody, one of the West's greatest showmen, who took the myth of the frontier and turned it into a traveling dream. Crowds in Paris and London cheered at the sight of cowboys and bison, unaware that the real frontier had already begun to fade. By the time the show folded, the myth had outlived the men who built it. You pass an old cemetery on the edge of town. Wooden crosses tilt at odd angles, names half erased by weather. You kneel by one, its carving barely visible. J. Miller, 1843 to 1910. No epitaph, no title. Just the dates, birth and dust. The wind hums through the grass, and you realize the West didn't vanish. It simply fell asleep in places like this. You stand, brushing sand from your coat, and glance once more toward the saloon. The lantern still burns in the window, a small, stubborn flame refusing to go out. You think of the man inside, his hand steady on a card deck, his stories circling like slow constellations. A legend, grown old and gentler for it. As you walk away, a new kind of silence follows you. Not emptiness, but peace. The West, at last, has stopped running. The dust of its legends has settled. And in that stillness, the myth becomes memory, soft enough to sleep on. The land changes as you move on. The air cools, the soil darkens, and the wind seems to whisper in another language. You cross a low ridge and see what was once reservation ground. Flat stretches of sage and cottonwood, and a single river winding like a ribbon of glass beneath the moon. The Wild West may have gone to sleep, but for the first people of this land, the night was never truly over. You walk beside the river, listening. Crickets chirp in uneven harmony. The water hums against small stones, its rhythm timeless. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cries, a sound both lonely and eternal. You imagine that centuries ago, this very same sound guided travelers by starlight. It was not a wilderness to them. It was home. The air smells faintly of cedar smoke. You follow it toward a small fire where an elder sits cross-legged, a blanket draped across his shoulders. His face carries the weight of memory, lines carved by wind, sun, and unspoken stories. He does not seem surprised to see you. He gestures for you to sit, and the moment you do, the night feels older somehow. People say the West ended, he murmurs, poking the fire with a stick. But the earth does not end. It only changes names. The flames crackle softly, casting orange halos that shimmer in his eyes. He begins to hum a low tune, deep and steady, almost like a heartbeat. The sound blends with the night air, folding you into something ancient and alive. A mainstream historical fact. By the early 1900s, many indigenous tribes across the Great Plains were forced into assimilation schools. Children were taught English, forbidden to speak their languages. their hair cut short, their songs silenced. But in hidden corners, at riverbanks like this, elders whispered the old words again. They sang to keep the world from forgetting its own sound. The elder looks up at the stars. They tried to make us sleep, he says softly, but the land remembered. You follow his gaze. Each star seems to pulse a little brighter, as if nodding in agreement. It is then you realize something. The Wild West may have gone to bed, but the land beneath it never closed its eyes. He tells you of the buffalo, once so many they made the ground tremble. Then the rifles came, and the thunder went quiet. You can still see their bones, he says, buried under wheat fields and highways. Yet sometimes, in winter, the snow settles in shapes that look like their backs, as though the herds are sleeping just under the frost. A curious side note. Archaeologists in the Dakotas discovered old hoof prints fossilized in river mud. They found them beside fragments of pottery and arrowheads, signs that people and buffalo once shared watering holes for generations. Historians remain divided about what truly bound them, survival, reverence, or something more spiritual. But they agree the connection was real. You can almost feel it here, the hum of that lost relationship, quiet, but not gone. The elder points toward the horizon, where a faint glow suggests the lights of a modern town. They live there now, he says. The cowboys, the settlers, the lawmen. But the night still belongs to us. He smiles faintly, showing the calm of someone who has seen too many sunrises to fear darkness. You ask if the stories still survive. He nods. Some, he says, not all. But stories are like seeds. Even if one falls into silence, it waits for rain. He gestures toward the fire again. Maybe tonight, you are the rain. The words settle in your chest, soft and heavy at once. The night deepens around you. The fire pops, sending up tiny sparks that drift into the black sky. For a heartbeat, each spark looks like a new star, born from the ashes of the old. You stand before leaving, uncertain how to say goodbye. He waves his hand in a simple gesture that means, go well. You walk back toward the river, and as you do, the wind carries faint drumming from somewhere unseen. It is slow, patient, steady, the sound of time itself, breathing. You pause at the water's edge. The reflection of the moon ripples across the current, and you notice how the river never stops moving, even when everything else seems still. That, perhaps, is what the West forgot, and what the night remembers. That silence is not the same as sleep. The land may rest, but it never dies. Behind you, the elder's fire fades into a single ember. Ahead, the prairie stretches under starlight, vast and endless as memory itself. You take one last look at the river and whisper a quiet promise that when the world speaks of the West, it will not forget the songs beneath the soil. The night softens into a deep indigo before you notice the faint flicker on the horizon. It is not lightning nor firelight. It is something steadier, more deliberate. You walk toward it, your boots crunching against gravel roads that did not exist a generation ago. The hum grows louder with each step until you realize what it is: electricity. The new dream of the West is not silence or gunfire anymore. It is the quiet buzz of light. You arrive at a town where the streets gleam under rows of electric lamps. Each bulb hangs like a small captured sun, glowing steady against the cool night air. Children linger outside shop windows, marveling at mannequins lit by golden halos. A man in a bowler hat locks his store, tipping his cap as he passes you. You see the old frontier spirit still flickering there, in the way he moves, brisk and hopeful. The air smells of ozone and dust, of coal smoke and something metallic. It is strange and thrilling all at once. The Wild West, once defined by campfire shadows, is now dressed in light. Even the stars seem to blink in surprise. Inside a diner, you find warmth and chatter. Waitresses glide between tables, balancing coffee pots like stage performers. A phonograph hums softly from the corner, playing a waltz that sounds almost tender. You slide into a booth, the red leather squeaking beneath you, and for a moment, you imagine what this must have felt like to those who once crossed deserts for gold. To them, light that never flickers must have felt like a miracle. A mainstream historical fact. By the 1920s, electricity reached nearly every major Western town. Cities like Denver, San Francisco, and Phoenix glowed brighter each year, replacing lanterns with filaments and candles with current. Electricity rewrote the rhythms of life, factories ran through the night, and evenings became hours not of rest, but of invention. The West, that once depended on daylight, began to dream awake. You sip your coffee and listen to two ranchers talking in the next booth. They are not discussing cattle or water rights anymore. They are talking about cars. One of them laughs. You can drive to Los Angeles now without a single horse. The other whistles softly, almost reverently. Progress, he says, sure makes the dust settle faster. Outside, a neon sign buzzes faintly, advertising the electric corral, rooms and radio. The words pulse red, blue, red again, like the heartbeat of a restless century. You step closer, tracing the glow with your eyes. For the first time, the West looks more like a painting than a place. Everything is illuminated, yet something feels dreamlike, almost unreal. A curious side note. When electric lights first reached small western towns, some residents refused to use them, believing they disturbed the spirits of the night. They said the moon grew jealous of man-made stars. For weeks, entire streets stayed dark, while families debated whether progress could be trusted. Historians remain divided on how much truth hides in that superstition, but it lingers like a soft shadow in every bulb's glow. You wander past shop fronts with glass displays, telegraphs, radios, typewriters, and gadgets with promises written in chrome. Behind the glass, the future hums patiently, waiting for the West to catch up. You catch your own reflection there, a traveler from a time that no longer needs horses. It feels strange, this blending of past and present, where pistols have become paperweights and lanterns serve only as decoration. The wind carries a different sound now, not the whistle of hawks or the creak of saddles, but the murmur of machines cooling after work. The world itself seems to exhale steam. Somewhere nearby, a train's horn moans across the desert, echoing through the electric haze. Even progress, it seems, cannot resist sounding a little lonely. You walk out of town toward the open fields. The lights behind you shimmer like a reflection on water, stretching for miles. The air grows cooler, and with each step away, the hum fades until only the desert's silence remains. But even here, the horizon pulses faintly, tiny sparks from distant wires strung along the rails, carrying voices and light from one dreamer to another. You kneel and touch the ground. It is still the same earth that once felt hooves and wagon wheels. Still dry, still stubborn, still ancient beneath the varnish of progress. The lights may have conquered the night, but the desert keeps its secrets. Even the brightest bulb cannot outshine 1,000 years of wind. You look back one last time. The neon flickers, the diner glows, and the moon watches quietly overhead, unimpressed but forgiving. The Wild West has not disappeared. It has evolved. It is no longer a place of dust and duels, but of dreams and currents. And in the strange new hush that follows invention, the West finally learns how to rest in light instead of darkness. You leave the last town behind, where the hum of electric lines fades into the whisper of wind across the plain. The stars return in full force, unchallenged and endless, as if reclaiming the sky from all that new brightness. Out here, the air feels older again, dry, crisp, and unbothered. You follow a faint trail leading west until even the trail begins to blur into the landscape. And there, in the quiet hollow between two ridges, you see it, a cabin, a single lantern glowing faintly within. The door creaks as you push it open. Inside, the scent of old leather and smoke clings to the air. A saddle rests against the wall, worn smooth by years of use. Beside it, a pair of boots lies neatly together as if waiting for morning. And in a rocking chair by the fire sits the last rider. His hat tilts low, his chin resting against his chest. His breath comes slow and steady, the rise and fall of someone deep in dreams. You can almost see the trail in his mind, the dust, the horizon, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats fading into eternity. The firelight dances across his weathered face, carving it into something softer than the legends ever allowed. A horse whinnies outside, quietly, as though it too senses the stillness. You step out to look. The animal stands tethered under a cottonwood tree, its mane catching silver from the moon. It watches you with calm, liquid eyes, the kind that seem to remember everything that has come before. Somewhere far off, a coyote sings, low and lonesome. You walk back inside, and the rider stirs. One eye opens, faintly amused. "Did not expect visitors tonight," he says, voice gravelly and warm. You tell him you are just passing through. He nods, like he understands everything in that simple phrase. "Passing through," he repeats. "That is all any of us ever did." He gestures toward the shelf above the hearth. There, you see relics of a vanished life, a rusted spur, a faded wanted poster, a single bullet polished smooth from handling. "They call us legends now," he murmurs. "But truth is, we were just men chasing pay, or land, or luck." He grins faintly. Mostly luck. A mainstream historical fact. By the early 1940s, many of the last true cowboys of the 19th century had died or retired. The open range was fenced, the cattle drives replaced by rail and truck routes. The frontier no longer existed in any official sense. Yet the image of the cowboy, the solitary rider, the quiet hero, remained immortal, galloping forever across film reels and bedtime stories. The rider chuckles softly, hearing your thoughts. Hollywood, he says, with mock solemnity. They gave us prettier faces and cleaner shirts. But I suppose it is nice, being remembered without the smell. A curious side note. In 1939, an aging cowboy named E.C. Abbott, known as Teddy Blue, published his memoirs describing real trail life. He admitted that it was far lonelier, dirtier, and more monotonous than any song or story ever suggested. Still, readers adored it. Even stripped of glory, the West remained irresistible. Historians remain divided on why that is. Was it freedom, struggle, or simply nostalgia that kept the myth alive? Perhaps all three, wrapped in dust and moonlight. The rider leans back again, eyes drifting toward the embers. I have had my share of both, he says. Freedom and dust, and neither lets you go easy. The fire crackled softly, the shadows breathing against the walls. You realize you are witnessing not an ending, but a long exhale, the last heartbeat of an age finally at peace. Outside, the wind carries the smell of rain over the plains. You hear it pattering against the roof, gentle and steady. The horse shifts, finding comfort in the rhythm. The rider closes his eyes once more, his hand resting loosely on the chair arm, fingers twitching slightly as if still holding invisible reins. The lantern flickers, then steadies again. Its light softens the room into gold and shadow. You stand quietly, listening to the silence between breaths. It is not empty silence. It is earned, patient, filled with memory. This is what happens when the Wild West finally goes to bed. It does not vanish. It dreams. You step outside and look over the plain. The rain has ended. Mist clings to the low ground, glowing faintly under the first blush of dawn. You can almost hear the world shifting. Trains, engines, typewriters, telephones, all those new inventions taking the place of hooves and campfires. And still, somewhere under it all, the heartbeat of the old land continues, steady and slow. You turn back once more. Through the window, you see the rider's hat tilt gently forward. The fire dims. The last echo of the Wild West breathes out. And then, in perfect calm, the room grows still. The West at last is asleep. And in that deep golden quiet, you understand. It never really ended. It simply learned how to rest. The wind moves gently now, slow enough to hear each grain of sand roll against another. The world you have walked through, dust, thunder, stars, and steel, settles into its long, steady breathing. The Wild West, once loud enough to shake the sky, has finally grown quiet enough to dream. You stand beneath a pale dawn. The horizon stretches soft and silver, the color of old memory. Smoke from a distant chimney rises straight upward, unhurried, as though even the air knows there is no more need to rush. The sound of a lone bird ripples through the stillness, a small note against a vast silence. You take a slow breath and let it drift out, imagining the trail behind you fading like footprints in morning mist. The campfires, the laughter, the gunfire, the promises, they all soften now, blending into one long sigh of history. The West does not vanish. It becomes part of the sky, part of the earth, part of the hush that lives between heartbeats. If you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes, hooves against dry ground, the whistle of a faraway train, the gentle strum of a worn guitar. They no longer demand your attention. They simply exist, like ripples from a stone dropped long ago. Even the myths have gone still, folded carefully under the blanket of time. You picture the old rider sleeping in his chair, the horse resting beneath the cottonwood tree, both bathed in the soft light of another century. You picture the elders by the river, their songs now mingling with the breeze. You picture the lights of towns glowing quietly, their hum fading into the night air. All of it connected. Every trail, every voice, every spark of life woven together into one long, peaceful exhale. And you, standing at the edge of it all, feel that same calm settle over you. The kind that comes only when everything that needed to be said has been spoken. When every restless wanderer has found a place to rest. When even the dust has stopped moving. The wind touches your face, cool and kind. It smells faintly of rain, wood smoke, and sagebrush. Above, the first stars of the next night begin to peek through, patient and bright. They do not judge or remind or warn. They simply watch, as they always have, keeping time for those who have finally stopped. You sit down, close your eyes, and feel the stillness grow around you. A vast, weightless calm that hums through the bones of the land. This is the West as it truly is now. Not wild, not conquered, not lost. Just resting. And as your own breathing slows to match it, you realize the story has not really ended. It has only reached that part where words fade and dreams begin to speak instead. Let them whisper in your sleep of open plains, of fading trails, of lanterns glowing softly in the dark. Let them carry you where the stars hum gently and the world is, at last, at peace. If you enjoyed this calm history story, please do not forget to like the video and subscribe. Sweet dreams.